Here we go. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. I'm Nick Fishman, as many of you know, and today we're here to present some new technologies in the background screening industry, and really kind of celebrating the fact that these companies and a number of you in the CRA industry are kind of taking the manual out of background screening. As you know, if you've been following Jason and I, for quite some time, we've been wondering where the innovation is coming from in the industry, where new products are, what people are doing that is meaningfully changing how we do things. And that's what we're hoping to get across during this presentation. So before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. As I've mentioned, that all attendees are on mute. If you do have questions, we're going to try and answer those throughout the presentation and or at the end. Our goal is to probably go about 45 to 50 minutes and to be able to answer questions. But if we do see them come up that is relevant to the slide we're talking about, we'll try and jump in with them. So keep them coming. Also, so that everybody knows, we are now recording. After we are done with the presentation, we will email a copy of the recording out to everybody if you want to review the highlights and certainly Jason's lowlights. So we're excited to present today, and let's get started. We've got a very impressive panel of CEOs from startups that are focusing on the background screening segment. And I want to, as soon as I can learn how to advance the slide, share that with you. So let's start out with Mike Fitz. Mike is the current CEO of Slack, Tiger Global, GGV, and Bessemer-backed startup Crosschq. Mike, you're a busy guy, clearly. Mike is also the former founder and CEO of advanced TV advertising and commerce company, Connect, which was acquired by JMJ Financial in 2018. He's also the former founder and CEO of the interactive commerce company Delivery Agent, which was acquired by Hilaire Capital in 2016. He's experienced in all aspects of corporate and business development, as well as general corporate functions, including finance, sales and marketing, technology, and product management. He's an industry thought leader who has been featured on CNBC, CNN, and Bloomberg, as well as in publications like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. So thanks for joining us here today, Mike, and for giving us that rousing bio.
Did I give you that? I apologize.
all good, all good. You're an impressive guy. What can we say? All right, next on the list is Darrin Lipscomb. Darrin is the CEO of Ferretly. He's a 30-year veteran in the technology industry, including launching several software and consulting startups with successful exits. His companies provided unique, forward-thinking solutions focused primarily on Fortune 500 companies and government organizations at the federal and state level. Prior to joining Ferretly, a powerfully simple application that incorporates AI to mitigate employment risk. Darrin was the global CTO for public safety and smart cities division of Hitachi Data Systems that was formed from the acquisition of his company he founded called Avrio Group in 2014, which provided citywide LOT sensors. Did I get that right, Darrin? IoT, of course. Sensors and a platform for geospatial modeling. I am butchering your bio. I apologize for that.
Geospatial, yeah. Close enough.
Once again, just another very impressive guy in the space. And lastly, Nick Macario. Nick, thank you for the short bio. Really appreciate it. He's the co-founder and CEO of Verifiable. Nick previously founded multiple employment platforms, which grew to millions of users, including remote.com, a global HR and job network, as well as branded.me, a professional network, which was later acquired. So thanks for joining us, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here with everybody.
Okay, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick ad on Morris Group Consulting, and then maybe you can kick off our agenda.
Sure. So as most of you know, or all of you know, I hope, Morris Group Consulting is a full service but boutique consulting firm solely focused on the background screening industry and supply chain. We are heavily involved with a lot of CRAs and those in the supply chain. And we really focus on talent recruitment, growth and scale consultation. We do a little bit of M&A and help guide companies and private equity through M&A transactions in the industry, and a myriad of other services, including marketing and sales consulting that we handle for a lot of you guys. So if you enjoy what you hear, we hope that you give us a call one day. Our agenda today is a newer concept that we're trying out, and the reason is you guys have read our blogs and heard our webinars in the past. Nick and I have been screaming from the rooftops that, you know, if people in our industry don't start to innovate, then people are going to come in from the outside and innovate for us. And that's really what's been happening in the last couple of years. I mean, I've been contacted probably by no less than 10 or 15 different startups out of Silicon Valley that are dipping their toe in the background screening industry. And we really wanted to bring these three out to you guys because we find them to be not only fascinating from the technology standpoint, but just a different way and a new way of looking at how screening is done, how the products are developed, but more importantly, how the processes are automated. So I'm fascinated by this stuff, and I think that you will be too. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about why the employment screening sector is so attractive to people on the outside, what taking the manual out of background screening actually means, how to navigate the buyers, are we trending away from criminal background records, which is going to be a kind of a controversial topic that we'll talk about a little bit later, and what products are out there beyond employment. So with that, we're going to give everybody an opportunity to just kind of tell you a little bit about their product and their company, and then we're going to move on from there and talk about some other things.
Yeah. So thanks, Jason. Let's start out with Crosschq. And incidentally, as you guys talk about your organizations, we're going to give everybody about 3 minutes to do so. Can you guys also mention why the background screening industry was so attractive to you? So let's kick off with Mike, please.
Awesome. Yeah. And thanks again, Nick and Jason for putting this together today. So just a little quick background on Crosschq. You know, we are not, my co-founder and I are not from the screening space, from the CRA space. We are both co-founders between us of 6 companies, one of which was public on NASDAQ, et cetera. So we're company builders. And frankly, we started the company because we were so frustrated on how hard it is to make good hires. And as we started peeking around on the sort of traditional screening processes, you know, that the reality is still that close to 50% of new hires don't last 18 months and are deemed as mishires by organizations. So that was what we really went out to tackle was, gosh, can we build a better platform to help companies fundamentally make better hires? We decided to start with disrupting the traditional reference check. The reason we did this is we just felt like this concept of human intelligence, of how can you get data and insights from people and convert those into data that can be used by companies to make hiring decisions was really a good place to start. And the traditional reference check has been suffering from a perception crisis, we believe. And I'm sure a lot of the folks in the audience here probably dismiss it completely or it's just not a priority in their stack. We just fundamentally believe that if you could get it right and if you could kind of take it to the cloud, use AI, do all the cool stuff that modern technology can do, that you can really turn this into something that can be a much more productive screening tool for organizations. So that's what we've done with Crosschq. You know, the cool thing is it's really quick, it's really accurate. These things are major cost savings for our customers and traditional manual approaches to how you've done reference checking, if you've done reference checking. And, you know, the other neat thing is these are just brand new insights and a brand new source of data. So this whole notion of human intelligence is what we're all about. You can see a couple screens on the monitor there in terms of what like a Crosschq report looks like. We call the core product our Crosschq 360, and this is really the modernized version of a reference check report. just high level in the company, we're 3 years old, headquartered in Silicon Valley. We are backed by major VCs and strategic investors like Slack and SAP that you mentioned. So we're really excited about where this is all going, and glad to be on this panel, learn from everybody, and get feedback from the audience as well in terms of where we're going.
A little footnote here, when Mike called me, God, it was probably almost 3 years ago. I think you were probably fundraising. I had the same reaction that probably everybody on the call has, and that's nobody does reference checking anymore. And then I heard and sought out and saw what he developed, and I'm like, well, they will now, because that product, where it went away, has come back strong using a platform like this. So
Cool. All right, Nick, up to you for Verifiable.
All right, thank you. Excited to be here. Thanks, everybody. Verifiable, so what we're building is essentially a modern data infrastructure and API to access and verify information on healthcare providers. So we do things like automate primary source license verification in seconds, monitor healthcare populations, and data enrichment solutions as well, which we're really excited about, and could talk about some different use cases. But really, this came from my experience in previous companies, and the background check industry actually led us to where we're at today. And I could talk a bit about that. But I spent the last 10 years building different career data related platforms. We mentioned a couple: a professional network, which grew to a couple million users, and then remote.com, which grew to over a few million users, and dealt with a lot of low quality data and just frankly misinformation in profiles about companies that people have worked at, skills they had, education, various credentials. So started looking at layers of like, how can we automate the verification of information in a profile, which led me to the background check industry and connecting with a lot of companies. And in networking in the background check industry, actually started to learn how different types of information, records, and credentials were being verified. And healthcare was one that specifically stood out, healthcare credentials, and that there was a lot of manual effort going into these like license verifications and other primary source verifications. So that's what initially sparked our interest, and then kind of started peeling back the onion layer and got really excited about healthcare and provider data in general, healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, etc. And the information around these individuals, these professionals, and like how many different parts of healthcare that connects to. So we are a new company. We launched earlier this year in January. We actually launched officially out of Y Combinator just a few months ago. We've been working on this throughout the year though. Newer company, moving, we like to think we move really quick, not too fast, but fast. We launched our first initial round of funding yesterday in TechCrunch, which was a $3 million seed round led by Tiger Global and some other great investors. And yeah, we're heavily focused in healthcare and solely healthcare, working with telehealth companies, credential verification organizations, and then some different background check companies, some great conversations happening there as well, which we're excited about. Great.
Thank you, Nick. And finally, Darrin, tell us a little bit about Ferretly.
Sure. Thanks, guys, both you and Jason, for having me. Do you want to flip the slide next?
Oh, sorry, thank you.
No worries.
See, moderators are people too. We make mistakes.
Last but not least. So I just put this slide up. When I saw these stats, I was pretty shocked, actually. And in fact, it's really what helped me decide that Ferretly was a worthwhile venture in the first place. The data that you see here was gathered from a 2018 Career Builder survey that was over 1,000 mid and large size companies. 70% of those that were surveyed said they were already screening candidates, which I was kind of surprised. But then if you dig down into the numbers, you realize that these are just hiring managers doing ad hoc searches on their candidates' Facebook or Twitter or Instagram profiles. So we know for a fact that a majority of companies are not currently outsourcing their social media screening in any way. The bigger stat or bigger takeaway here, though, is that 57% of those surveyed said they use the information to make a hiring, or I really should say not hire the candidate. So some of the things that were cited as reasons for not hiring were, provocative photos, drinking, drug use, discriminatory or racist comments, and even criminal behavior. So from this data alone, we believe the opportunity for social media screening services is truly immense. And what's driving this more than anything is that cancel culture is becoming institutionalized. and companies can be held liable for what their employees say online. One example is Yelp just a week or two ago started tagging companies. It was very controversial, but they're starting to tag companies on their site as being racist if they get certain amount of feedback or certain types of feedback. So that's just one example of how this is truly becoming institutionalized. So now more than ever, really companies need to know that they're hiring a toxic employee or someone that could potentially represent a threat to their employees or brand. So with Ferretly, we take the manual effort out of the social media analysis. We're incorporating artificial intelligence to analyze both text and images from posts, from comments, likes, and we present it in a very insightful way called the social media report. Generally speaking, these reports can be generated in about 30 minutes. And then you have a human analyst that goes through a redress process to make sure what the AI is providing is accurate. But the result here is that we remove any potential implicit biases from individual hiring managers, right? So we're allowing organizations to outsource this to an actual consumer reporting agency. In other words, our partners. We're seeing just social media screening growth accelerating. In fact, just the past few months, we've had several of our partners grow their social media background checks by more than 300%. Lastly, and I'll leave you with this, is that I always get this question. I figure I would just go ahead and put it out there now. Is it legal? The short answer is yes, it's absolutely legal. The FTC, in fact, ruled on this that as long as a provider follows FCRA rules, social media is no different than reporting based on any kind of public records, such as criminal or credit reporting. The key here is to follow FCRA guidelines, have a valid use case, don't review public information that's older than 7 years, and have a repeatable and consistent process that guarantees some level of accuracy. So if companies, continue to do this in an ad hoc manner, which we know they are, it really opens them up to inconsistencies and can easily result in EEOC violations. So I think, we're starting to see that tide turn. Companies are really starting to wake up to this realization and turning more and more to, a legal process, if you will. About Ferretly, we launched in January of 2019. We went live in mid-year, so a little over a year and a half we've been live. We signed up over 24 partners so far, which is pretty good. And we're also funded through a seed investment through a few industry folks. And we're looking to take that money and really grow the business here. So we want to rely on our partners. That we believe in a healthy ecosystem, a healthy partner channel, and that's really our primary go-to-market strategy. So it's a great opportunity to be able to talk to you guys here on this platform.
Thanks, Darrin. Okay. So let's get into our first topic of discussion. All of you in some way are taking manual processes that we've been doing in the background screening industry for a long time, and you're trying to automate them. And I just wanted to get the perspective from you guys about the manual process and how you guys are each doing your share to get to an automated place and to get to that automated place with a degree of quality and compliance that people can get comfortable with. Nick, I'm going to start with you on that one. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that from our perspective, there's certainly situations where you need someone manually reviewing something and making a judgment call, and you need an expert with compliance. But there's a lot that we do that it's hard to argue shouldn't be automated. When you talk about like automation of a primary source license verification, for example, we're extracting data directly from a source using a machine, and there's zero room for human error in that process. And it becomes much faster, quicker, with time-stamped audit trails for documentation and audit purposes. So it's really hard to argue against doing something better, faster, cheaper, and of course, like removing any human error, which can cause big issues. There's other use cases for us as well in terms of populating data. I talked about data enrichment, but taking the manual effort out of going and gathering additional information. Let's say you're working on a limited data set. Maybe you have a license for a healthcare provider and you'd like to go out and find all licenses associated with this individual, or you'd like to populate a profile or an application without a lot of back and forth with the individual to streamline processes. Still needs to be confirmed for accuracy in some cases, but yeah, for us, like we think that there's certainly a need for experts from a compliance perspective to make judgment calls at certain places, but there's a lot of work that can and should be done by machines, and that's what we're excited to help.
Great, thank you, Darrin. I'm gonna turn to you now. I mean, I think that the value prop for manual work, when you compare it to people doing it individually compared to what you're doing, is pretty obvious there. But maybe talk a little bit about how the automation you're bringing is different than other social media companies that are companies that provide social media background checks.
Well, the big heavy lift here for a human analyzing social media is just the sheer volume, right? So you could have, a candidate with 1,000 posts on Instagram, for instance, with multiple images per post. You could be looking at thousands of images. How does a human analyze that in any kind of time frame? And the answer is they don't. They skim through. You're just sort of browsing timelines. We take more of a holistic approach. Our software was built to look at not just original posts, but also any kind of interaction that your subject or candidate is performing online, and bring that all together and analyze it in a unified and consistent way. Going back to the question of a human, you absolutely have to have a human involved, both on the front end as part of identity resolution process, and then again on the back end to analyze the output of what the AI delivered to you to make sure it's accurate. Some of this, what's hate speech can be very subjective. So the machine learning algorithms don't always get it right. We try to get it right as much as possible to minimize the amount of work that the human has to do. But really it's about, replacing, the manual drudgery of any kind, trying to perform any kind of reasonable analysis across the board on all your candidates' social media.
Yep. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think two things. Just really simply put, for folks that were doing manual reference checks, it would take on average 3.2 hours to get 3 references on a candidate. We've got that down to literally 2 minutes of work for the company, right? So it's blatantly obvious how much more efficient this is. I think broadly too, to your point, I mean, the world's in a different place, right? And all these different platforms, all the APIs that are out there, getting systems to talk to each other. So just getting all of our technologies integrated into the workflows of our partners is just easier, right, than it had been. So I think that is a really critical thing. I mean, we do a lot of work with applicant tracking systems and HRIS systems, and we're literally just one click from their existing workflow. They can activate Crosschq. That's all they have to do, right? So that's just real stuff and real time savings and efficiency for our partners. I'm
curious to know among the three of you, because I feel like the background screening industry, it goes both ways with automation, and I think it's for a good reason. I think that people are skeptical of automation because there's so much litigation in background screening, and I think that the CRA industry is sometimes a little bit slow to adopt these measures. Have you heard from those that you've been speaking with in the market of kind of a trepidation around going to more automated solutions? And I'll throw that out to any of the three of you that want to answer. I hope the answer is no, but I'm curious to know if you have. Yeah.
I definitely have. I mean, I talk to CRAs and especially people in the supply chain that don't really understand technology. They certainly don't understand automation or what it actually is and what it means. They just hear the word. And I think some of them are scared. So I think there is a hesitation out there to do things, because it used to be that in this industry, if it was too fast, it wasn't good. If it was too quick, it wasn't accurate. Well, that doesn't really relate to today's technologies and the way that the automation is utilized, especially with criminal court records and other things. So I think that there's a lack of understanding within the industry today. Yeah,
and Jason, do you think that is a mainstream thought throughout CRAs, or do do you think it's generally a small subsection of CRAs that are somewhat resistant? What do you think?
It's a small subset of CRAs and people in the supply chain, but it's also a subset within those companies, in other companies. So, you know, I've talked to companies that still believe that, you know, unless you walk into the court and pull a criminal record out by hand, it's not accurate. And we all know that that's not true today. And you can do things quickly and effectively and accurately through some of these tools.
Cool.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, I think it's necessary for CRA to, you know, to be able to scale without necessarily linearly scaling the human capital, right? So you by nature want more automation in order to scale the business in general. So I think that's working, you know, to the advantage of startups like us, you know, that are taking a lot of that manual effort out. So, you know, the analysts that you already have on your staff can then, you know, run, you know, 10, 20 reports an hour, for instance. You know, so I think they're in sync in that regard. So.
Yep.
Nick, and I think too, one more for you on that, just in terms of and I think Darrin mentioned this as well, there's so much in the manual world that exposes these organizations to greater liability that they don't necessarily overtly acknowledge, right? Yeah. And it's a real thing. I'll tell you very specifically in our world, you know, we get feedback from folks, hey, I like to do reference checks the old fashioned way. I like to make a phone call because I like to hear what the person is saying and I can interpret that. I'm like, that's the worst thing you could possibly say, right? In terms of introducing unconscious bias into a process and just, you know, blatant violation. In addition, things like doing secondary or back channel reference checking, which is just no bueno in the world that we're in today. So I think, you know, there's part of this automation that actually increases compliance in a very real and material fashion.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, I should have asked that question from that perspective, from the positive perspective, rather than the negative. I think there is great value in being able to replicate something that doesn't involve human decision, where it's possible. So,
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Hey, a couple of quick questions we've gotten about the specific technology. So, Darrin, I'm going to start with you because we've had a couple of questions about this related to individual profiles that are locked down, such as like a non-public profile on Facebook. How do you deal with that situation? We've had a number of people ask, so I thought you could address that.
Yeah, two things. One is we only look at public information, right? So we're conforming to FCRA guidelines. We're not asking for usernames and passwords. We're not asking for friend requests, except friend requests, etc. So it's only what's publicly accessible. There are cases you'll run up against. Mostly you see it on Instagram, where maybe 30% of the accounts, when you add them into Ferretly tells you, hey, this account is marked as private, right? So only the people that they're connected to on Instagram can see those posts, those images. So we still can pull that profile into Ferretly. We pull bio information, we pull post counts, follower counts, and we still include that on the social media report. So there's nothing stopping us from generating a report and telling the employer, hey, you know, here's an account they have, it's private, right? But gathering what we can that's publicly available.
Okay, thanks, Darrin. And Mike, over to you really quickly. A couple of people wanted to know how Crosschq differs from companies like Checkster or Skill Survey. And then also just a question about whether you guys are going direct to employers or whether you're partnering with CRAs.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one. I mean, we would love to partner with CRAs. We just didn't get a lot of interest when we came to market. And this is part of what I said at the outset, the identity crisis of reference checking is just low on people's priority list in the CRA community. So for sure, we're wide open. We'd love to, but today we're selling direct to employers. On the other piece, you know, we don't really pay much attention to those platforms, to be really frank. I mean, what we've built, we kind of built from the ground up with using modern technology and AI and data and all that good stuff. I think what we know is that they've been around for a decade and haven't had a ton of success. So I think I don't really know the nuances of any, frankly, of our competitive set. I will tell you one of the a number of things that we do that are, I think, pretty unique to the space, but really around data is a really key part of our whole system. We actually connect all of this pre-hire candidate intelligence with business outcomes as well. So we're actually collecting into the Crosschq AI engine post-hire data around tenure and performance. So ultimately, we can give you a real 360 view on your hiring decision, but what was the quality of that hiring decision? One of the things we've just learned in this industry is that whole quality of hire analytics is just broken. No one's paying attention to it. That's why we have a 50% mishire problem. So again, I don't know those platforms well enough to give you a good answer to that, but I do know what we're doing, and I do know why customers are loving it so much.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Mike. All right, Jason, can you kind of share where you believe that automation applications can help in background screening and where they have helped?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen for years that CRAs and specifically vendors developing new technologies on how to access criminal records through either screen scraping or using data normalization, all different kinds of techniques that they've been using that a lot of us have been adopting into our workflows for the last couple of years. We've also seen with verifications where, it used to be that you had to pick up the phone and call HR and fax over release. A lot of those processes have been automated as well. It's nice to see these new entrants that are thinking about all the other services that we offer and allowing us to sell them in different ways as well. So that we have the social media screening, the reference checks, and professional license checks. We're also starting to see a lot of automation built into workflows. So where in the past, your adjudication was very manual and only handled by human beings. Well, now we're seeing a lot of adjudication modules being built that are being built with AI and with automation in place as well. So we're starting to see it from all different corners of the ecosystem. And again, a lot of that is coming from outside of the industry and not being developed with industry veterans.
Okay, thanks.
So,
I'm sorry. Did somebody have something to say?
No, that was me. I was going to just continue on to the next slide.
Yeah. So, Jason, I was going to ask you and I both noticed and have noticed for a while that the startups that we are seeing and the technologies that we are seeing lately are trending away from criminal records. Have we reached some kind of cultural tipping point? And are there other things that you're thinking of as to why we're not seeing as much in criminal records?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I wanted to title this slide, background checks are dead, long live background checks, or criminal background checks. And I'm being funny at the same time as being serious. The use of criminal records, companies are always going to order criminal record searches from CRAs. It's always going to happen. But their application and use of them from the employer side is going to become less and less important. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing that with the EOC guidance that came out 8 or 9 years ago. We're seeing that with a lot of the plaintiff suits and everything else, that minorities have a higher rate of criminal records. Therefore, if you use criminal records, you're discriminating against minorities. We all know this. So what else can you do in order to find out if somebody's a good person? With Crosschq, for instance, I think it's net promoter score, where the most important question on there is, would you refer this company to somebody else? It's like a really important question when you're trying to analyze a company. Well, with a reference check and an automated reference check specifically, asking somebody, is this person a good person to work for my company? There's a lot of value there. Same thing with social media searches. It'd be really, and I haven't seen a lot of litigation here yet, and especially within negligent hiring. But if you could have known, you should have known. And in today's Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements and all the other hashtags out there, if you could have known that somebody was a racist when you hired them, then maybe you should have known. And is there any liability for a company to not look there? And we know the answer to that question is yes. We just don't know how it's yes yet. But these tools very much so allow companies to dig a little bit deeper into the person. And we also know now that these types of things with the social media, justice warriors out there, it can put a big stain on your company by hiring the wrong person that has the wrong views and is public about them. That could come back and damage your brand. So it's tools like this that we think are next generation screening tools that are going to allow companies to make much, much better hiring decisions in the future.
So, Mike, we know diversity and inclusion, it's not just a buzzword within HR anymore. It's actually becoming very important to organizations to ensure that they are enhancing all of their efforts related to this. And I think you have a unique point of view on what Crosschq brings to the table as it relates to that.
Yeah, I think that just hiring decision making is in a major form, is being majorly transformed, right? And I think there is for sure risk mitigation tactics that all of us can help with. But on the other, when you flip that on the other side, it's really around, and I think about Crosschq more of a screen in product than a screen out product. We have data now where organizations are using us at the very top of their hiring funnel. So they're doing this, post the initial application, pre-first interview, to try and remove unconscious bias from their traditional way of screening applicants. And we have companies like an Upwork, as an example, a great public company that has seen a 32% increase in underrepresented groups getting through their hiring process because they're using the Crosschq report as a currency and a determinant to take people through the hiring process. And so there is just a lot of running room there. I think the other, just to give you another extreme in terms of how we're being utilized that we're very proud of, and I think it's what makes me laugh about the criminal record component is, we are being used. We do a lot of things with second chance hiring and fair chance hiring. So Crosschq is being used with ex-military entering the workforce or moms returning to work. We also have a program in place, an anti-recidivism program in place where ex-convicts are running their Crosschq on themselves because they've surrounded themselves with good people and that sort of thing, and using that when they apply for their job because they don't have a resume and their criminal check is going to come back positive, right? So there's a lot happening here, and I think just fundamentally the decision-making process for hiring is changing, and there's a lot we can all help with in that front.
Yeah, and Darrin, I think you've got a unique perspective on this because people traditionally are concerned with social media background checks because it reveals some of this protected class information, but actually Ferretly is helping in this regard. Tell us how.
Yeah, it's a valid point. I brought out a little bit when I reviewed the company here, but what you have today is a decentralized process where hiring managers are looking at someone's social media posts in an ad hoc fashion. So all these different hiring managers, you just think about it within a single organization and how you really have no control over potential implicit or unconscious bias that may enter into that decision-making process. Oh, hey, he likes BMWs. Well, I like BMWs, or, he looks like me, or, those things really shouldn't come into play. So our strength here is the fact that you can leverage this platform and sort of centralize the process, take the viewing aspect of individual posts away from the hiring manager and just provide a summary that's insightful enough to make a decision based on, certain key categories of risk, like hate speech, political speech, threats of violence, et cetera.
Okay, great. Nick, I'm sorry, we haven't gone to you in a little while, and I wanted to ask the question about there being budget, both among CRAs and among end users. Are you finding that there is money left in buyers' wallets for services that don't involve criminal records?
Yeah, the money's being spent, right? It's not like we're trying to tap into new use cases or budgets with some of what we're doing. Some of the stuff it's being spent already, right? Just on human capital and manual effort to do things, right? So whether it's like verifying a license or whether it's potentially manually verifying a population or going out and manually doing searches to gather additional information for a process, whatever that may be, it's already being done, right? The money's being spent. It's just about potentially reallocating that to spend it more efficiently in a lot of cases. But yeah, we haven't run into too many budget issues.
That's an interesting point too. I mean, we get questions all the time. How do I grow my business? You got to add product. You got to add new processes. You got to add things like that in order to grow your business. And new products is the best way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I also think it's the positioning of it in terms of, are you really adding more to what they're spending to do this? Or to Nick's point, are you replacing internal costs that they don't even know they have or aren't paying attention to by replacing it with something that is more automated? Jason, you want to take the next slide here?
I wasn't prepared to, but I can.
I can if you'd like.
Well, no, I mean, this is a question that we've been talking about for a while too, and that's, is the buyer for all of these products that we're talking about today HR? And I think the answer is no. There are other buyers within an organization aside from HR that can purchase products like this. For instance, with Ferretly, they might already have a screening provider to do their all their pre-employment screening, but their security department might want somebody to be able to monitor their social media or something like that for different things based on security. So there could be different options out there. And when you're pitching these products to new companies or existing companies, you really want to make sure that you have the right butts in the seats in the conference room to make sure that you're selling to the right people.
And you guys, all three of you mentioned the fact that, whoops, sorry about that, that you each have recognized the fact that it's not just the HR buyer that you need to be going after. Nick, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, from our end, there's a few different buyers. It's certainly under an umbrella of HR, but there's credentialing teams, compliance teams, profit and loss teams, recruiting teams, network management teams within healthcare specifically for various use cases. So for us, like, we've been used in a number of different ways. We call it a pre-screen, but basically doing a quick check, as like we work with some employers get high volumes of inbound applicants. And right now they're manually reviewing let's say, verifying a license, and malpractice insurance is a first step in filtering down these candidates to then put them through recruiting cycle, interviews, and then a full-on credentialing process after that. So we've automated that first step for them, of a quick pre-check of taking these 700 applicants a week down to the few hundred that they actually want to spend time interviewing and meeting, or far less than that, interviewing sometimes. But so kind of like a pre-screen stage before an actual screening or credentialing process. Automating credentialing workflows is an obvious one, but then on the data enrichment side for us, like, there's a lot of interesting components there around that get into like recruiting, which do tie to diversity, which you spoke about earlier, right? Being able to find candidates based on certain search parameters and frameworks, pre-populating an application or a profile, which I mentioned as well, location specific information, looking for a certain type of provider in a certain location. So many different use cases outside of, like, let's say, a screening or a credentialing process for us.
Nick, that's good. There's a question on the question and answers here that there are plenty of solutions that provide medical credentials. Are you saying that you've been able to integrate directly with licensing agencies, and how does that differ from FACES?
Yeah, FACES is, I'd say, a component of what we're talking about, like to monitor a population, right? I could tell you with I guess, Verisis specifically, like, certain clients have had to come to us specifically for licensure, license verification, the ability to have a modern, flexible API that can do a real-time license verification. So we receive a request for a license verification in real time. We go directly to the primary source and return that in a few seconds through a modern, customizable API as one specific use case. I don't think those other solutions you mentioned are doing anything around like data enrichment specifically in those use cases I touched on, but to provide some clarity. I think the things to think about, the differences between us are, like, a lot of traditional systems are built in a specific way and relatively rigid way sometimes, that they must be used a certain way to be able to use them. The difference, and you touched on this earlier too, Jason, with workflows specifically, is that we found different organizations have all sorts of different processes and workflows, and having a modern API that's customizable, programmable, can be inserted into different workflows and used basically however you want it to be used, versus adopting an entire new system to say, this is the way you're going to use this, right? That, along with, like I talked about, real-time data acquisition, and then going into data enrichment as kind of a whole separate offering.
Thanks, Darrin, I know you talk a lot about the difference between selling to HR and security. Can you highlight why that's important, and particularly for Ferretly, how you're handling that on the pre-employment side and then kind of the monitoring side?
Yeah, I think that is the distinction, right? So on pre-employment, certainly HR typically owns that, although in certain instances, corporate security, but more so corporate risk, corporate security in terms of ongoing monitoring from what employees are saying online, right? And so that's why we implemented a continuous screening module. Once you've screened that candidate, it's very simple then to set them up to screen daily, weekly, monthly, or even yearly. And then identify those risk factors and be able to send notifications out. So more of a continuous screening aspect to ensure your employees are staying compliant with your social media policies.
Yeah. And overall, Jason and I just think it is a good idea for CRAs to develop as many relationships as they can within the organization. You never know when the HR person that you've got a strong relationship with is going to go somewhere else. So whether that means increasing your relationships within HR or increasing the relationships with other departments that might not absolutely be the buyer, but that have a seat at the table when it comes to these decisions. It'll just do so much more when it comes to retention and your ability to sell just beyond pre-employment screening.
We all talk about, integrations making us sticky with our clients. Well, integrations is one piece. You want to be sticky with all your buyers and all your people within the organizations and have those relationships as well. That just makes you, you're in there for a longer period of time.
Okay, Jason, go ahead to the next slide.
Well, I think we kind of covered this, other uses beyond, pre-employment screening, and that's, obviously monitoring and post-employment screening and other applications that we've discussed previously.
Mike, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mike's got a pretty interesting use case beyond just pre-employment screening that you want to do as well.
Yeah, and this is a bridge from your prior comment to two pieces of this. One is in terms of like who you're selling into, and how do you get to the C-suite, frankly, and create urgency at the C-suite that these are valuable solutions that can help have real influence on their companies. And one of the things I mentioned earlier that we're doing is, and we realized just that, gosh, these companies are flying blind as it relates to how they connect all of their pre-screening data with post-hire outcomes and really understanding the quality of their hires they make and what's most predictive. Maybe the criminal check is an indicator in some organizations of a high likelihood of success. Who the heck knows, right? But they're flying blind on that stuff. So that whole notion of turning that quality of hire analytics into a standalone C-suite metric and having sort of a single source of truth or an on-demand way to get to that is something we have found as another way that our data is becoming really valuable. The other thing, though, that's a little bit more radical is how you can, and I think Nick may mention this a bit too, and they're going here a bit, is just how you can also help from sourcing talent. We have a very unique approach where we can convert the people that are giving feedback on candidates into new talent sources. They opt into talent pools. We then have them run their cross-check on themselves, and now all of a sudden you have this candidate who's actively looking for a job, has expressed interest in coming to work for your company, and now you have all this intelligence about them before you even talk to them. So some really cool things there, and there's a ton of dough at the top of the funnel, as we know, in the talent acquisition and HR world. That's where the majority of the budget lies. So we do believe that to the extent you can chip away and get to those dollars, it's a good thing.
So we got some questions, or do you want to go to, why don't we just go right to the questions? We got 10 minutes left and we've got a bunch of questions up there.
Sure, that's great. Well, I want to ask this one question that came up earlier regarding the platforms. I'm assuming all three of you at some point or intend to at some point try to sell your services through the major background screening platforms. The question is, what has been the biggest hurdle with that for you all? So I guess I'll, whoever has a point of view on this, feel free to chime in.
I've said it a couple of times. They just haven't cared. They just haven't prioritized what we're doing. It's literally that simple.
Darrin, how about you? Anything?
Yeah, we're in the process of integrating with some background screening platforms as well as ATS. I guess the challenge, is a little bit of a technical challenge in that some of these APIs or the approaches from these background screening companies are a little bit older, outdated XML-based interfaces and such. So we're looking at sort of creative ways, maybe implementing integration to Zapier, which would open up a whole slew of potential other use cases around this. But we're still fleshing out our external API. We're getting ready to release here in a couple of weeks, and then those are going to start coming on board to our platform. Those integrations, those platforms will fall pretty quickly after that.
Okay. Nick, have you had conversations with any of the platforms yet?
We have, yeah. So we have one in the pipeline, another kind of in talks in the next few months. But yeah, in the next 3-6 months, we should be in a couple of them as well as ATSs. So those are in progress.
Couple of yes or no questions here. Mike, is Crosschq only available for U.S. reference checks, or can this be used outside of the U.S.?
So the answer is no. We are available outside the U.S.
Yeah, I didn't hear. I'm sorry.
We are available outside the U.S.
We're
currently.
How many different languages does your platform translate into?
So we use, it's infinite because we use a number of, off-the-shelf translation services to ensure that all that stuff works. But we're currently, we're live in a bunch of action in the EU right now, or India, Central America, just in terms of places where we have active customers currently.
Good. So for screeners, that opens up a whole new product that we can offer internationally in over 200 plus countries.
Yep.
Okay. And another question for you, Mike, is on Crosschq. I assume the applicant gives the name and emails of who to contact.
Say that one more time. Sorry.
On Crosschq, I assume the applicant gives you the name and emails of who to contact.
Yeah, amongst other information, but yes.
Okay. All right. Question for Darrin. Let's say the applicant is friends with a hiring manager or company in social media, but has all posts to non-friends private. Is the AI able to run a check through the company or hiring manager's credentials to see if the post is not locked out by privacy settings, or is this flirting with FCRA issues?
You're flirting with FCRA issues. So we don't make a distinction if the hiring manager is friends with the person. When they run a social media background check through Ferretly, they're using third-party anonymous access. So they're only going to see public information. So the person that's already a friend can obviously see more information, presumably on Facebook, depending on their settings, than what one would see publicly. But all a company should care about is what that candidate is saying publicly, regardless. It's analogous to what they do in their privacy of their own homes versus outside in the public square, right? So
it's an interesting point. It's not, and again, it's not only an FCRA issue, it's also a terms of service issue, and privacy issues as well.
Correct.
Nick, is healthcare sanctions database you're searching your own data set, or are you reselling through Faces, MedX, Apris, et cetera?
We're acquiring our own data, so we're not reselling data currently.
Okay.
Hey, Jason, I saw that there's a question there about our views on how automation might be possible in employment screening. If anybody on the call was on our last webinar, or if you weren't, I would encourage you to go review that. We basically did a full hour on how employers can get back to an automated position and limit their exposure to third-party providers, such as the talks in the work number.
Okay. And there's a question, are the ATSs helping to provide their customers with easy access to your new offerings? And I would assume that through APIs, that's what they're doing, correct?
Yeah, they're pretty good. It's a good channel for us. I think we're live in 10 ATSs now, and it's a good channel for lead generation for sure.
Great. Okay. Do you guys have anything else? Any other things you guys want to talk about or bring up, or things we missed?
Well, we missed a lot. So
I think there's a few questions still unanswered here. I'm just going through. Some are related to Ferretly.
Okay,
one question here from Anonymous. I don't know if you want to go through these or not.
No, go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead. I actually thought we got to most of those, Darrin.
There some down on the bottom. It says answered, but I don't know if they got answered.
Oh, go ahead. Feel free.
Well, now I admit. The question was from Anonymous on what % of accounts are marked as private. Maybe we did address that to a certain degree. That number though it depends on the platform, right? So Instagram, we see about maybe 30% of accounts are marked as private. Twitter, a very small percentage. LinkedIn, almost non-existent. And then Facebook, it's sort of, the way that they've reworked their model. If somebody posts, they generally speaking, the default settings are to your network, right? To your friend network. But there's quite a few, I'd say over 50% are still have public posts available. So.
Yeah. And Darrin, I think it's important also to point out that we say social media background check, but it's not just Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, it's also, we do a web and news. So it's a full media search around that subject. We combine it all. We look at sentiment across all the posts, including the web and news as well. So that factors in.
Cool. Okay.
And I think Sherry had a question on continuous monitoring. She's probably asking to the broader audience, you, Jason, and Nick, I think, more so than in general, I guess, continuous monitoring, I think is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of hit on it a little bit, Darrin, with you. We were talking about not only using social media for the pre-employment side, but continuous screening throughout somebody's employment. Nick, I know that there is absolutely an implication for you with monitoring when it comes to healthcare licensing. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sanctions is the obvious one, but licensing too. Licensing is getting more popular, as it should be. And that a lot of licenses aren't monitored at all. They're monitored on expiration. So it can be like re-credentialed or renewed every couple of years, and you're not tracking anything that happened in those 2 years, say. And a lot of things can pop up and happen, disciplinary action wise or otherwise. And so license monitoring, and the reason it's not is frankly because it's done manually today, a lot of license verification, but now that it can be automated in some cases, in our case, a lot of companies are starting to monitor licenses. And then criminal is actually important too. We don't do anything with criminal, but like we run into big health systems that had issues recently with like some physicians that had criminal issues that they didn't know about from years prior that they should have been tracking but weren't. It caused a lot of issues. So.
Yeah. And as it relates to my opinion on continuous monitoring, whether it relates to the products that we've been talking about today or just products in general, I'm a big supporter of it. I think that employers are being held accountable not only on what somebody might have done before they got employed, but what they might also have done while they were under the tenure of their employment. And so we're big advocates. We obviously want it to be fair to all parties and done in a way that is consistent with the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the EEOC. But anything that can help you gain insight that would help an organization avoid risk, by and large, we're obviously big fans of.
All right. Well, that takes us to the top of the hour. So wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. We don't know what our next topic is going to be yet, but it will be next month at some point. We'll look out for that information. But Mike and Nick and Darrin, thanks for joining us. And if anybody has any questions regarding these products or anything we've talked about in the past, feel free to email us. We'll keep you updated on our blog as well if anything comes up. But if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email, and I'll be happy to answer those questions for you.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, everybody.
Guys,
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Later.